The fire that swallowed a home. The town of Fayetteville, West Virginia in 1945 was a place where the American dream, forged in the fires of a recently won world war, felt tangible and secure. It was a community of hard-working people, of coal miners and shopkeepers, where doors were rarely locked and a neighbor's word was their bond. George and Jenny Sodder were the embodiment of that dream. George, an Italian immigrant with a fierce work ethic, had built a successful coal trucking business and a beautiful life with his wife Jenny and their 10 children. Their white frame house perched on a hill overlooking the town was a bustling, noisy, loving testament to their success. Christmas Eve that year was charged with a special magic. The war was over. The boys were coming home. For the Sodders, it was a time of profound gratitude and celebration. The house was decorated with strings of popcorn and cranberries. A large, fragrant Christmas tree stood proudly in the living room, its branches adorned with delicate glass ornaments and tinsel that shimmered in the light. The air was thick with the smells of Jenny's cooking, simmering sauces, baking bread, the promise of a feast. That evening, December 24th, 1945, the older children were buzzing with excitement. Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were the 5 who would be home that night. The older siblings, Joe, Marion, and John, were away, and the youngest, Sylvia, and the baby were also present. After a raucous evening, the children eventually settled down. The older ones, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, slept together in a converted attic bedroom, a cozy, sloping-ceilinged space that was their own private kingdom. The house slowly quieted. George, exhausted from a long day, made his final rounds. He checked the coal-fired hot water heater in the basement, ensuring the damper was closed. He was a cautious man, particularly about fire. He had seen the devastation it could cause and was meticulous in his habits. Jenny, too, was fastidious. Before bed, she carefully moved the flammable Christmas tree decorations away from the light bulbs, a small, mundane act of precaution that would later become a critical piece of the puzzle. The first anomaly, the first tiny crack in the foundation of their normal world, had actually occurred earlier that day. A salesman had come to the door peddling insurance. He was unusually persistent, and when George firmly refused, the man's demeanor had shifted. He had looked George in the eye and said with a coldness that felt out of place, "Your house is going to go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed." George, a tough, no-nonsense man, had dismissed it as the bitter rant of a failed salesman and shooed him away. He would remember those words with chilling clarity in the days to come. The night deepened. The clock ticked past midnight. Christmas Day had begun. It was a sound that pulled George from his sleep. A thud, followed by the clatter of something rolling on the roof. Then the phone rang. He fumbled in the dark, picking up the receiver. A strange, unfamiliar woman's voice asked for a name he didn't recognize. Annoyed and half asleep, he grumbled that she had the wrong number and slammed the receiver down. He glanced at the clock. It was around 12:30 a.m. This wrong number call would be the second bizarre event, a call that, in retrospect, seemed perfectly timed to ensure the phone line was in use, or perhaps to confirm someone was home. Jenny was the one who smelled it first, a faint, acrid scent that didn't belong. She shook George awake. "George, the house is on fire!" George bolted upright. The smell was stronger now. He ran to the window of his first-floor bedroom and saw nothing but darkness. He rushed to the other side of the house, and the sight that met his eyes sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through his body. The top of the house, near the children's attic bedroom, was Engie. The ashes that held no bones. The Christmas Day sun rose on a nightmare. The Sodder property, once a symbol of immigrant success and family joy, was now a black scar on the landscape. The air, once filled with the scent of pine and baking bread, was heavy with the acrid stench of wet charcoal and despair. George and Jenny, hollow-eyed and shivering in the cold, refused to leave. They stood as sentinels over the ruins, their very presence a challenge to the official story beginning to solidify. A tragic electrical fire. But George Sodder was not a man to accept a simple explanation. His grief was a raw, open wound, but his mind, sharpened by years of building a business from nothing, was already working. The anomalies of the night were not just bad luck, they were a sequence, a plan. As soon as the smoldering heap was cool enough to approach, he did something the fire department and sheriff had not bothered to do thoroughly. He began to sift. With his bare hands, a shovel, and a grim, unwavering focus, George Sodder started his own investigation. His sons, Joe and Marion, who had rushed home, joined him. Together they picked through the debris, inch by painful inch. What they found, or rather what they did not find, would become the central, baffling pillar of the entire mystery. A house fire, even an extremely hot one, does not vaporize human bodies. It consumes, it chars, it reduces, but it leaves evidence behind. Teeth, with their enamel, are incredibly resilient and can survive cremation temperatures. Bone fragments, especially from larger bones like the pelvis, femur, or skull, are always left behind. They may be brittle and blackened, but they are identifiable. After days of meticulous searching, the Sodders had recovered many items from the rubble. They found molten blobs that had been glass Christmas ornaments. They found twisted metal from bed frames. They found the cast-iron bodies of a sewing machine and a mangle, both warped but recognizable. They even found a portion of a children's record that had somehow survived the inferno. But they found not a single tooth, not a single fragment of bone, not a trace of the 5 children who were supposed to have been asleep in that attic. George stood in the center of the cleaned foundation, a stark, empty concrete slab that seemed to mock his loss. He looked at the pile of salvaged, unburned items. His voice, when he spoke to his family, was low and steady, but it carried the weight of a terrible conviction. "They are not here," he said. "My children were not in this fire." He took his findings to the local authorities. The Fayetteville Fire Chief, F.J. Morris, a different Morris from the bus driver, and the county sheriff dismissed his concerns. Their explanation was simple. The fire, fueled by the coal in the basement and the home's wooden structure, had been so intensely hot, reaching temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that it had completely incinerated the bodies, leaving no remains whatsoever. To George, a man who worked with coal and understood combustion, this was not just an excuse, it was a scientific impossibility. He knew that commercial crematoriums, specifically designed to reduce bodies to ash, required sustained temperatures of 1,600 by 1,800 degrees for 2 to 3 hours, and even then, they used pulverizers to grind the remaining bone fragments into the ashes given to families. His house had burned for a fraction of that time, and yet not one of the hundreds of teeth from 5 children had survived. It was absurd. The official investigation seemed less about finding the truth and more about closing the case. The county coroner, a man named, held an inquest just 2 days after the fire. Without a single piece of physical evidence, without any remains to examine, the jury returned a verdict of death by accidental fire caused by faulty wiring. The case was officially closed, but George Sodder would not let it close. He became a man pause. Her father's unending war. The official case was closed, but for George and Jenny Sodder the battle was just beginning. The empty foundation of their home was not a grave, it was a crime scene. The lack of bones was not a mystery of nature, it was evidence. And so they transformed their profound grief into an engine of relentless, almost superhuman determination. Their lives, from that Christmas Day forward, were dedicated to a single purpose: finding their children and exposing the truth. George became a detective, a publicist, and a crusader rolled into one. His first major act was the erection of the billboard. It was more than just an advertisement for a reward. It was a declaration of war against the official narrative. Towering over Route 16, it forced every passerby to confront the 5 young faces and the unsettling question, what if they are still alive? It was a constant public reminder that the Sodders would not be silenced, would not forget, and would not accept the comfortable lie of a tragic accident. The billboard became the engine of their investigation. Tips, leads, and letters, some sincere, many cruel hoaxes, flowed in from across the country. The Sodders followed every one. They spent thousands of dollars, a fortune in post-war America, on private investigators and travel. George would pack a bag at a moment's notice to travel to Ohio, Florida, or Texas to interview someone who claimed to have seen a child who resembled Martha or Lewis. One of the most promising leads came from a reputable source. In 1949, a woman from St. Petersburg, Florida, contacted the Sodders. She was a respected businesswoman and a former police officer. She told them a chilling story. While eating at a restaurant, she had been served by a young busboy who was the spitting image of the photograph of Maurice Sodder, the eldest missing boy. Struck by the resemblance, she had engaged him in conversation. The boy, who said his name was Morris, seemed nervous and evasive. He told her he was from a children's home but his story was inconsistent. Most strikingly, when she pointed to a map on the wall and asked him if he knew where West Virginia was, the boy had paled. He stammered, "That's where I'm from, but I'm not supposed to talk about it." Before she could learn more, the restaurant owner, a large, intimidating man, had intervened and pulled the boy away, telling the woman to mind her own business. She never saw the boy again. George and a private investigator immediately flew to Florida. They staked out the restaurant, but Morris was gone. The owner was hostile and uncooperative. The trail, like so many others, went cold. But for the Sodders, it was another piece of the puzzle. Another indication that their children were alive but had been given new identities and were being watched. Then there was the theory that would haunt the family for decades, the possibility of a kidnapping motivated by revenge. George Sodder was an outspoken, passionate man. He was fiercely proud of his Italian heritage, but was equally fiercely anti-fascist. In the years leading up to World War II, he had been vocal in his criticism of the Italian dictator. This had caused friction within the tight-knit Italian immigrant community. George had even gotten into a heated argument with a man who was a known sympathizer, a man who had threatened him. The theory went that the kidnapping was an act of retaliation by pro-sympathizers, possibly even connected to the emerging. It was a way to punish George for his political views by taking what he cherished most, his children. This would explain the meticulous planning, the cut phone line, the moved ladder, the sabotage trucks. It was a military-style operation designed to leave no trace. Some even speculated the children were taken to Italy to be raised in a pro-household, which would explain the immense difficulty in finding them in the United States. This theory gained a terrifying layer of Cree. The legacy of a vanishing time, the one adversary even George Sodder could not defeat, marched inexorably forward. The bustling post-war era gave way to the 1950s, then the turbulent 60s and beyond. The Sodder case, once a national sensation, faded from the front pages, becoming a local legend, a ghost story whispered about the family on the hill who lost their kids. But on that hill, time stood still. The billboard, though repainted and maintained, became a relic. The empty foundation grew over with weeds, a silent, stubborn scar. George and Jenny aged within the shadow of their loss. They never celebrated Christmas again. The holiday was not a season of joy, but the anniversary of a wound that never healed. They raised their remaining children, Sylvia and the baby who survived the fire, in a home filled with both love and a palpable permanent absence. The dining table always had 5 empty chairs. George's relentless pursuit of the truth continued well into his old age. His body grew frail. His once powerful frame stooped with pain and the weight of his decades-long crusade. But his eyes never lost their fire. He corresponded with journalists, true crime writers, and anyone who showed a genuine interest in the case, meticulously compiling binders of documents, letters, and photographs, a sprawling, chaotic archive of a family's nightmare. Jenny, the quiet, steadfast heart of the family, provided the emotional anchor. Where George was public and confrontational, she was private and enduring. She kept the Louis photograph in her Bible, praying over it every day, believing with a mother's unshakable faith that she would see her son again in this life. The world outside their hill was changing. The pro-fascist sentiment that had fueled one of the leading theories had vanished with the end of the war. The specific individuals suspected in the early days died, taking their secrets with them. The trail, already cold, seemed to freeze solid. Then, in 1968, a flicker of hope, or perhaps of closure, appeared. A woman contacted the Sodders, claiming to be a nun from a nearby state. She told them a stunning story. On her deathbed, a man involved in the kidnapping had confessed to her. He revealed that the children had indeed been taken as an act of revenge against George for his political views. The plan had been to simply scare him, to hold the children for a short time, but the fire, which was meant to be a small, contained blaze, had gotten catastrophically out of control. Panicked, the kidnappers had fled with the children, and fearing murder charges if they were caught, decided to never return them. They were placed in orphanages or with families far away, and given new identities. The nun claimed that the man, consumed by guilt on his deathbed, had begged for forgiveness. She would not reveal his name, citing the sanctity of the confession. For George and Jenny, this was the closest they would ever come to an answer. It wove together the threads of the revenge theory, the kidnapping, and the bizarre, non-lethal nature of the fire. It explained why the children were never returned. The crime had escalated beyond the kidnappers' intentions, but without a name, without proof, it remained just another story, another haunting what if. George Sodder died in 1968, just a few months after hearing the nun's account. He passed away in the home he built next to the ruins of his first, never having found the peace he so desperately sought. His final words to his family were a plea to never stop looking. Jenny lived on for another 21 years, a widow guarding the memory of her lost children and her husband's crusade. She died in 1989, having never removed the billboard. It stood as a testament to their love and their defiance, until it was finally taken down years later, the children's faces preserved only in photographs, and the annals of unsolved mysteries. The surviving Sodder children, particularly Sylvia, inherited the LR.